Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, a Jerusalem psychotherapist. In this week's Torah and Psychology post, of Parashat Vayikra, we're going to look at the idea of resolving conflict in loving relationships. So obviously, in different close, intimate relationships, whether it's between husband and wife, whether it's between parents and children, and between siblings, there can be times of conflict, where there is tension, where there is an inability to agree with each other, to understand each other, and this can result in very painful emotions and conflict. And it's important to try to work on how to resolve this conflict, because there will be times, as we said, there will be times where naturally within these relationships, there will be these difficult and painful emotions and times of conflict. And it's important to work out how to navigate these situations. So if we look at this week's Parsha, and the very first pasuk, we see Vayikra. Vayikra is the word that is written with a small aleph. And there are different explanations for this. One of these explanations is presented by the Baal HaTurim, which is saying that if we look at the context of this pasuk, Hashem was calling Moshe, was calling to him to talk with him. And Moshe, in his humility, as the Baal HaTurim explains, wanted to write the pasuk in the Sefer Torah in a way that presented this calling of a Kadosh Baruch Hu to talk with Moshe as being almost a chance occurrence. Moshe, in his humility, didn't want it to be presented as HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be presented as a close, intimate encounter between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe, calling him personally to a meeting and a conversation. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to make sure, or to try to present it in a way that preserved his value of humility, to try to present it as if it was a chance occurrence. So even though there is the word which is written in Vayikra in full as a calling to meet, to talk, Moshe insisted on writing it with an aleph to try to present it as a word of Vayakar, a chance occurrence. So on the one hand, we see a lovely message of humility, as we know Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person, and this again strengthens and illustrates this value of Moshe Rabbeinu. But let's look further at the context. This is after we've read and after the tragic event of the Egel Zahav, the event that caused a fracture in the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Bnei Yisrael. And you could say a fracture maybe between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu being the leader and the representative of the Jewish people. So we have a conflict. We have a context here of a conflict within the context of a close, intimate relationship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with Moshe Rabbeinu, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu with his child, or with his lover. However, we want to understand the relationship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Jewish people. But it was a close, intimate relationship with, at this moment, an event where there is tension, where there is fracture, where there is conflict. And this, we can see here from this pasuk of Vayikra, has great significance in how to resolve conflict. Because when there is a tension in a relationship, the two sides could continue to hold out as being in an impasse, neither wanting to compromise or to negotiate or to change their stance, and it leads to deep sense of resentment and actually reinforces and strengthens the conflict, with each side protecting and maintaining his own position and not wanting to find a way to compromise, because in a way they perhaps don't want to be seen as being the one to show a weakness. At times of tension and conflict in a relationship, in a close relationship, it can be very painful to try to negotiate. It can be very painful to try to rejoin and connect because of the pain that the other person has caused. But what often happens is that when one is willing to make that change, the other will naturally start to make a change. And what often occurs, certainly if there's within a therapeutic process as well, with the help of therapy, or if parents and children or couples learn to do this in a natural way, each one starts to actually make a change, and the other one, each one starts to take responsibility for their side of the argument, of the tension, and naturally that will then reduce the tension, reduce the conflict, and the two sides will come together in a natural way. So if we look at this week's parasha and the pasuk of Vayikra, the Baal HaTuram's explanation is humility, but it also is actually saying that Moshe Rabbeinu, representing the Jewish people at this time of conflict, is bringing himself down. We can say it's natural for him because that is his milah, his value of humility. But within this relationship, this conflict, he's willing to compromise. He's willing to bring himself down. He's willing to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a humble way, approaching his within this loving relationship, the other side, wanting to connect again, wanting to come together, but from a place of humility. And in the same way, in a reciprocal way, HaKadosh Baruch Hu being obviously this omnipotent, omnipresent power, the only way for him to have a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch, with Bnei Yisrael, and with Moshe Rabbeinu, is to have to reduce himself through a process of tzimtzum. The very essence of being able to have a connection and a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu requires a tzimtzum. It requires a reduction, a reducing of oneself, of in a way coming down and compromising. So what we see here from both sides is both Moshe Rabbeinu, through his humility of the small aleph, and through tzimtzum of Kodesh Baruch Hu, of reducing himself and limiting himself, and in a way compromising himself, it's a bringing together of the two sides of Kadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe Rabbeinu, or Kadosh Baruch Hu and Bnei Yisrael, and this is a joining together after the moment of conflict, following the Egel. So this is an important message of how to resolve conflict in a loving relationship. Each person being able to take responsibility of his side, each person being able to make that change, that small movement, coming down perhaps a little notch, a small level, whether it's through humility, whether it's because they are understanding that they need to, in a way, come down and reduce themselves in order to come back and connect with another person. And that's how this conflict can be resolved in loving relationships. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.